Moving to another colleague who is Mr. François Renaud, who is an education manager in the FDA. By FDA, I hear Le Français des Affaires. It's a contraction of the name. So François Renaud is, as I said soon, an education manager. He is also someone who coordinates the diploma in the FDA. So I let the speech to François Renaud to present us his speech, which is involving in the assessing speaking in a vocational communication. François Renaud, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alassane. Thank you, all of you. Bonjour à toutes, bonjour à tous. A good day to you all. I'm François Renaud, and I will try to tell you a few things about assessing speaking in vocational communication. In 1958, the European Economic Community is created by Germany, Belgium, France, Italy, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. In 1958, Peyo creates the Smurfs. And in 1958, the Paris Chamber of Commerce and Industry, of CCIP, produces their first professional French certificates, namely the Certificat Pratique Commercial et Économique and the Diplôme Supérieur de Français des Affaires. Since then, the CCIP produced a variety of tests, certificates, and diplomas in several professional domains and for a variety of levels of proficiency. In 2015, the CCIP collection of professional French certificates amounted to 15 different certificates in 8 different domains from A2 to C2 levels. In 2015, well, a bit before that, the CCIP started to think about reshaping this collection and address some of the limitations of the then current collection and range of certificates, namely the legible variety of levels, length, duration, format, content, assessment exercises and methods of the various certificates. A limited demand in certain domains, the absence of a certificate addressing the needs of A1 speakers when recent theories and school books were published in which professional French was taught to beginner students, the rather small number of professional documents in the exam material, traditional 4-skill approach, that is reading, listening, writing and speaking, and an emphasis on linguistic correction and specialized vocabulary, as well as rather academic assessment methods, as in academic exercises such as MCQs, as opposed to authentic-looking communication tasks. So I am in no way implying that the previous CCIP exams were bad stuff. Not in any way. As a matter of fact, all the characteristics of the reshaped exams were already present to an extent in one or the other former exam. And the reshaped exam are evidently legitimate children of the CCIP culture of teaching and assessment of professional French that has been built for now more than 60 years. Now, the reshaping keywords were simplification, authenticity, and action, as in action-oriented approach. Simplification of test administration via a computer-assisted test, entirely produced and assessed by the CCIP, as well as harmonization of the exam structure, format, and duration throughout domains and levels. Authenticity, insofar as the new French Diplomas activities are designed to be as close as possible to real-life professional situations, and they use a variety of authentic-looking professional documents, scenarios, or mini case studies to prove the candidate's ability to perform in professional communication tasks. And action-oriented approach to language assessment, in which the candidate no longer reads or listens in order to understand, point, but in which the candidate understands what he or she reads or listens to in order to perform professionally, as well as the inclusion in the assessment criteria of task performance indicators, in addition to the traditional criteria on language tools mastery. The steps of the reshaping process started in 2010, 11, and mostly 2014 and 15. The CCIP started with a preparation phase that included data collecting, field collecting, analyzing, and editing of various référentiels de compétences langagières in various domains such as business, tourism, health, etc. Then we had the definition phase, which consisted in selecting frequent and or important communication situations which imply the use of transversal language know-hows and tools that are accessible to a definite level of proficiency. The design of the modal activities, like the specifications of the test, and the conception of one or several prototypes. Then we had the experimentation phase, with experimentations in various fields and subsequent corrections of the models, to finally get to the publication phase of the new sets of exams for business at the end of 2016, for tourism and hospitality, for international relations, and finally, 2 years ago, health. So the result of this reshaping is that all exams present the same structure with two sets of activities. One set that is called understanding and processing information. That's a computer-assisted test in which the candidates will process written information, will process oral information, and will interact in writing. And the second set of activities is called interacting orally, interagir à l'oral, with two role-play activities. The construct of the exam is based on the action-oriented approach of communication. The title of this presentation reads, Assessing Speaking in a Vocational Communication Context. I should try to define what I meant by vocational communication. You can find in the literature a diversity of words like vocational communication, institutional communication, occupational communication, or professional communication. We at Français des Affaires use français professionnel as the main word. Okay, the CEFR explains that occupational domain embraces everything concerned with a person's activities and relations in the exercise of his or her occupation. In exploring professional communication, which she published in 2012, Stephanie Schnoor gives a large definition of professional communication, which is conceptualized very broadly as interactions which may take various forms and which take place in a context that is broadly related to work and involve at least one participant who is engaged in some work-related activity. She also very interestingly refers to the transactional and relational aspects of professional communication, where transactional aspects in an encounter refer to those behaviors that more or less explicitly aim at getting things done and achieving outcomes, while relationally oriented aspects describe behaviors that aim at enhancing interpersonal relationships and creating a positive working atmosphere. That's what she says. That's what she writes. So basically, professional communication is any kind of communication which involves at least one professional participant. That's a broad definition. And a commercial standardized assessment tool, such as the French DFP Diplomas, cannot test every possible communication situation. With the professional French diplomas, the CCIP is considering only a part of that professional communication. As I said before, each DFP exam offers a selected number of usual, frequent, transversal, that is to say somewhat archetypical professional communication situations, with a strong focus on transactional aspects. That is to say, a focus on the communication task that is to be achieved in this situation. To paraphrase the CEFR in its chapter 2.1.5, Task, Strategies and Texts, by communication task, we mean the part of a professional task which involves language activities and make demands upon the individual's communicative competency. The relational aspects that aim at enhancing interpersonal relationships and creating a positive working atmosphere, that is small talk and chit-chat, they are not considered as such in the CCIP's diplomas, as they can be likened to a conversational use of everyday language with topics such as family, hobbies, culture, etc. That is the subject of general French learning and assessing rather than professional French. Professional language is always short of time, so we have to concentrate on what is typically professional, I would say. But of course, relational aspects are an important dimension of professional communication tasks, because they must be taken into account to achieve the transactional aim of the interaction. By paying attention to the interlocutor's feelings during the current interaction, by being able to attentively listen to him or her, to offer reassurance, to consider the interlocutor's feelings and respect the interlocutor's faith or integrity. We're talking about good practices of professional communications as they are taught in any professional school. In short, most instances of professional communication are characterized by an overall orientation towards outcomes, that's transactional aspects while still considering relational aspects. The activities that can be found in the DFP exam correspond to various types of interaction, manager to team member and backwards, colleague to colleague, professional to external professional, such as supplier, for instance, professional to lay people, such as customer, patients, and so on. And various genres of discourse, such as information, like in presenting facts or figures, instructions, like giving or following orders, negotiation, assistance or guidance, like giving explanation or advice. You can read here a list of these language tasks that constitute the interagir à l'oral, interacting orally sections of the DFP exam for various domains and at various levels. You can see that the first task, IO1, is an interaction where the participants' discourses are necessarily interdependent and must take into account the interlocutor's questions or answers, wishes or advices, arguments or worries in order to fulfill the task. The second task, IO2, is more a production, as in continuous speech, and with a precise duration, but in both tasks, if the general structure and main issues of the interaction or production are predictable to an extent, a significant amount of improvisation is expected, as well as great liberty in wording. So, how does the emphasis put on the actual efficiency of a communicative act appear in the conception of the communication tasks of the exams? Well, each speaking activity, we call them activité, follows the same formal pattern. You have a situation that is a short presentation of the context of the action, like a theater set, and the attributed role, the assigned role of the candidate. The role of the candidate being always that of a professional person engaged in a work-related activity. You have a task, a professional communication task with a precise description of what the candidate is expected to achieve, so expliciting the aim and the way to achieve this aim in language-related tasks. You also have resources, documents, that is information to be processed, input information, to be processed in order to reach the communicative aim of the situation and task. In business exams, that can be an email with instructions, can be tables or graphs, a product sheet, a CV. In tourism, it can be a menu, a restaurant's menu, an extract of a tour catalog. In international relations, you can have a proposal for negotiation. You can have a humanitarian, a mission fact sheet. In health, you can have a disease fact sheet, the patient case, a treatment memo, and so on. The exam communication task. The exam task is a communication task. Performance of the task implies that the candidate is not only taking in or giving information, but that the candidate is processing useful information in order to achieve a communicative aim, taking into account and strategically adapting his or her speech to the interlocutor's input and response. The candidate is then expected to adopt a professional posture, to select useful information, to organize the information for maximum impact, to use correct language, as in vocabulary, grammar, phonetics, and so on. This leads us to the following question. What kind of assessment criteria may point out the various factors of this speaking efficiency that are not limited to the use of linguistic tools such as phonetical or grammatical levels of comments, but include verbal and nonverbal abilities, as well as interactional and mediation strategic decisions. Here is a simplified presentation of the current assessment grid that is used in the DFP exams. The grid offers 2 sets of criteria and 3 levels of proficiency. The 3 criteria related to task performance are professional posture. Assessment of these criteria is about social linguistic competency, paralinguistic and nonverbal aspects such as body posture, facial expression, eye contact, and so on, verbal markers of social relationship, of politeness, of register, level of formality, all these being markers of the expected attitude in a professional situation. Second criterion is text organization. The assessor will observe the use and the relevance of connectors and cohesive devices, the respect of the interaction schema, that's the pattern of social interaction that is presented in the CEF4 as part of the functional competency, in order to assess the ability to structure and manage discourse in terms of plan, coherence, and cohesions, and in correspondence with a given professional situation. The third criteria is pertinence or relevance and completeness of transmitted information. We're talking about essential information that is mentioned or omitted by the candidate. Talking about level of detail and accuracy. Assessment of these criteria regards the transmitting of essential information which is necessary to a sufficient performance of the task, and or additional information which correspond to a complete performance of the task. We're talking only about information that is included in the candidate's document. The second set of criteria correspond to the control of linguistic tools such as lexical, phonological, syntactical knowledge and skills, with range and accuracy of vocabulary, command of specialized terms, approximations, etc., range and accuracy of syntax and grammar and conjugation. Assessment of these skills is made with regard to what can be expected from a speaker of this CEF4 level. Phonological competency is fluency, pronunciation, and this is assessed in view of what can be expected from a speaker of this CEF4 level. Both second and third criteria, text organization and pertinence of information, also include a dimension of mediation strategy, inasmuch as the processing of the input information requires that the speaker has to choose when and how and which information is to be transmitted to the interlocutor in order to achieve its communicative goal with the maximum efficiency and the minimum use of resources. For instance, when during a meeting a commercial manager comments on a table of figures or quantitative data on the company's sale, well, she's not expected to express orally all the data which appear on the table, but rather to summarize the main tendencies, a rise, a drop, a stagnation, to give a few enlightening examples and cite pertinent figures, to spell out data that differ from the general tendency in order to inform participants and allow them to make pertinent commercial or marketing decisions. Another example with a doctor who presents the results of a radiography. The doctor will select essential information from the radiologist's report, that is, the information which justifies the therapeutic actions that the doctor will prescribe, and rephrase this information in a way that is understandable by the patient, who is a lay, a non-specialist, and that is acceptable by the patient in the meaning that the doctor has to reassure and appease the patient in response to perceived signs of worries, for instance, that may not be verbal. So, what are the various... that's wrong button. What are the various roles and functions of a human interlocutor in this assessment situation? What does the human interlocutor do in the examination room? As we have seen previously, the exam subjects describe a situation and assigns a role and a task to the candidate. On the other hand, the examiner will be in the same time, successively a proctor who welcomes the candidate in the examination room, tells him or her where to sit, puts him or her at ease, checks the candidate's identity, quickly reminds the candidate of the format and duration of each activity, starts and stops the audio recording, signals the start and the end of the activity. The examiner is also an actor who plays his or her assigned role as defined in the examiner's supporting documents with name, job function, position and personal aim in the interaction, with additional information possibly unknown to the candidate, with a loose script of the expected interaction, what we call canevas d'interaction, possible questions and remarks, possible counter-arguments. In the first interaction activity, the examiner plays an active role as an interlocutor to the candidate, depending on the subject and as it is specified in the examiner's supporting document. He or she will answer the candidate's questions or ask him or her questions or present counter-arguments following the indication or using the suggested script or rephrasing the information which appears on his or her supporting document. In the second production activity, the examiner plays a rather passive role as a listener. In some cases, particularly if the candidate stops speaking well before the end of the allotted time, the examiner will ask a question or raise an issue to which the answer is, of course, present on the candidate's supporting documents. So ask a question or raise an issue in order to elicit more speech from the candidate and collect further proof of the candidate's ability to perform the task. In both instances, the examiner must keep the professional attitude and manner of speaking in accordance with the usual practice in that kind of communication situation. The examiner is meant to give the candidate every opportunity to speak and demonstrate the range and quality of his or her competency. that is not speaking too much, for instance. The examiner has to adapt his or her level of speech to the candidate's expected level of proficiency. And the examiner must be able to skillfully follow on a thread of the candidate's speech in order to elicit nuances from the candidate, for instance, or provoke some unexpected turn of the conversation in order to push the candidate a bit further outside of his or her comfort zone and allow him or her to show further proof of his or her ability to complete the task. And finally, the examiner is an assessor who establishes the level of the candidate's performance for each of the criteria on the basis of what the candidate actually demonstrated of his or her ability. Deconstructing the whole performance of the candidate from the various points of view which constitute the different criteria of assessment. Now, in view of the complex entanglement of verbal, nonverbal, and strategic dimensions that constitute the candidate's performance, in view of the active role of the examiner in eliciting such performance as a co-builder of the candidate's speech, in view of his or her role in the analytic assessment of the candidate's multidimensional ability to perform a given task, in comparison with what a machine can produce in terms of interactive speech or process in terms of assessment, we find that for the time being, the human examiner remains probably the best tool for assessing speaking in a professional communication context. I thank you very much for your attention